Okay, I would like to invite the author back up, Colin Harper, to tell us a few more things about the book.
Niall. Sorry, Niall. Oh dear.
I suppose it's such a big body of work about one person. I have to ask.
Is this your autobiography you're talking?
Yours? No, John McLaughlin. No, it was just to see in terms of the contact you had with John McLaughlin himself, what permissions he gave or blessings he gave.
It's interesting. John, it's funny. Well, John said earlier in the interview that was quoted by Jim's reading, he said, "Look, whether I've got a show tonight, if it's one person or 100,000, it's the most important show in the world." And he's a very serious musician, and he's incredibly devoted to music. Almost unbelievably devoted to music. And tonight, this very night, he's playing his more or less annual show in London. He's at the London Jazz Festival doing the Royal Festival Hall, and so he's managed to sustain a serious career at a serious level. Even though he's followed his own muse, and every 2 or 3 years he'll disband whatever unit he's in. He'll start something new. He'll maybe do an acoustic guitar trio for a year or two. Then he'll do a kind of electric band. Then he'll do a collaboration with Chick Corea or something. It's this constant evolving body of music. But for me, it comes back to that Mahavishnu period as being something really special and unique. And I wanted to celebrate that. And I asked him 2 Christmases back. I emailed him and asked, I'd like to do this, but I'd like to write this book, but would you be interested in being involved in it? Would you collaborate with it? Even if it was just a couple of interviews or whatever. And his wife got back and said, "Look, it's very flattering, but really no, he's too busy with his current projects." And I emailed back and said, "Well, look, it's really, I really would feel very uncomfortable doing this if he actively didn't want it to be done." So very incredibly generously, he got back to me personally and said, "No, you've got my blessing if you want to do it." And I know that 2 or 3 of the interviewees that I tracked down, people who'd worked with him, I know that they went to John and said, "John, is it okay if we talk to this guy?" And he apparently said, "Yeah, no problem." So it's quite an enlightened way of looking at things. Somebody who, he's not... he's not interested in doing anything himself with his past, but he's enlightened enough to let somebody else celebrate his past in a way. It's quite unusual. It's almost like writing a posthumous book about somebody who's still alive. And I emailed him again last Christmas and said, "Look, I'm 10 million words into this or whatever it was at the time. Would you like to see it?" And he said. He emailed back and said, "No, it's very flattering, but I've no interest." So I'm actually, Linley, in the unusual position of writing a book that the subject isn't even interested in. So let's hope that isn't a portent for sales.
I'm guessing he would have to suspend what he was doing for 6 months to read it anyway.
Well, this is the thing, for all we know, he's working on the world's greatest. He's found the lost chord. I'm the man from Porlock who's knocked on his door, and he's If only I had another 10 seconds to work out that chord. But
well, we talked earlier on about the fact that you have an e-book and a book. I mean, I've seen these Kindle things. I'm too old to get a Kindle, girls and boys. But basically, I'm guessing that the memory would only really hold this book if you had a Kindle. So you'd have a special John McLaughlin Kindle kind of book. Out of curiosity, you're writing a book now for 2014. Will books still be around in 50 years or 25 years, or what's the future for books of this kind? Is there something, I know financial value isn't something you're considering in any way, but I mean, in terms of the value of a book that's so substantial about the career of a musician who by that stage will of course, it will be posthumous, where do you see the future of this kind of thing happening? And the value of this book 50 years down the line?
Grammatically, Linley, that was a very interesting sentence. There was a number of subclauses there, if I may say so. Can you pass me that bag of tricks? It's pertinent to this. I'll just set aside this clipboard. I bought some clipboards earlier on, and I thought.
Do you want to look in, or do you want to have a random dip?
Let's look for random dip. What's this? Oh, this is actually a Horselips biography. I don't know what it's doing in there, but is there anybody here who was in Horselips? There's a man. How about that? This book is actually just out in time for Christmas. It's a Horselips biography. It's endorsed by the band. It looks fantastic. If I had two hands, I'd open it, but unfortunately, I'm holding this very important clipboard. So we'll set aside this, and we'll see what else is in the bag. What else is in the bag? Oh yes, here we go. Well, this is interesting. This is Heather, my wife Heather and I.
Survey book, is it?
It is a book. It's a yellow book. And sorry, what was the question?
No, go ahead.
This book. This is really. This is pertinent to the question of do books have a future, because no matter what gizmos and technology and digital this or that happens, books, if you create something physical, it sticks around. If you put something online, it's only there as long as you pay the bill for the service provider. And a good example of that, Joe Moretti, who was the lead guitar player who played on Shaking All Over with Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, and he played on Brand New Cadillac by Vince Taylor. All these great British rock and roll records. Joe was an early crony of John McLaughlin's, and they both went into the session world, I should say, in London in the 60s. And Joe had a terrific website going there for a while. He died about 2 or 3 years ago, and on his website he'd published all these terrific memoirs about, the London session work scene and the bands he'd been in, and all of his reflections and those things. Really terrific. And I accessed some of that material because he died a couple of years ago, and I accessed some of his memoirs and cited them, obviously, the source and so on, in the book. And then halfway through the book, his website disappeared like that, and it's gone forever. So, there's a guy who didn't get a chance to write a book. This book here is interesting. It's called Jazz in Britain by a man called David Bolton, published in 1958. And my wife Heather and I were at a hotel in Leitrim about a year ago during the writing of the book, and Heather got a fantastic deal on Groupon, as Heather often does. I suspect Heather could probably have negotiated a far better rate for your services than even I did, Linley, but I didn't. Perhaps not, but anyway, the point is that this hotel, the bar in this hotel had been, refurbished, by one of these companies that will refurbish your bar to look like a certain style of thing. And it was obviously a gentleman's club circa 1910 or something. So wood paneling and leather seats and all the rest of it. This was only spoiled by the Sky Sports being on the thing on the wall. But anyway, in part of the decor of this hotel was a bunch of old-looking books. So, the interior decor company had obviously gone to oldbooks.com and got a job lot of stuff that nobody wanted, and this book was one of them. So, obviously I stole it, But it was full of fascinating stuff, and really, I quoted from it in the book. So this book lives on because, it's quoted in my book. And, this is a book that's more than 60 years old and full of interesting stuff. What do we have here? It would seem that the modern jazz scene in Britain is suffering from too many musicians without a public and too many enthusiasts without any opportunity for hearing live the music they are prepared to buy on record. Does that resonate with you, Linley?
No, definitely not.
Okay, here's a foreword by Chris Barber. And I actually interviewed Chris a while back, and he's quoted in the book, but Chris Barber, jazz is probably the most misused word in the dictionary, perhaps because, like most creative art forms, it's very hard to define and harder still to justify in the face of those people who simply see no point in it. I'm sure that's something you come up against all the time, Linley. Mrs. Hamilton, maybe, I don't know. He is a rash man who will set himself up as a jazz prophet. There have been many of them in the past, and time has proved almost all of them false. And what else do we have here? Should I borrow that? It's great, yes. You most certainly can. He aims at pleasing a future-conscious public, and his guiding principle is a sure and solid firm faith in the concept of progress. He tends to form his own private theory of jazz development and to pursue this in his own music, with the result that there are almost as many schools of thought concerning the future of modern jazz as there are modern jazzmen. It's full of profound stuff. This guy was, this is a book that needed to be stolen. So, so that is, and who knows, in 50 years' time, Bathed in Lightning, John McLaughlin, the 60s and the Emerald Beyond, published by Jawbone Press in 2014, will be kicking around some faux retro hotel with a scribble on it saying, "All the best, Linley Hamilton." What the hell is, you know? But no, the serious point is they stick around. They're physical artifacts. They're important, and you know, books still do lend a certain gravitas to the subject, to whatever they're, you know, what they're being written about. And actually, there have been surprisingly few books about British jazz in the 60s. There are 3 books that purport to be about that, and you know, none of them are flawless, but it's still an area that needs a lot more work done. And actually, British jazz men in the 60s, they had this terrible inferiority complex. You know, even some great players like Phil Seaman and Tubby Hayes and Ronnie Scott, you know, all of those guys, British jazz really only started post-war, and they were catching up with American jazz, which had started obviously 50 years before that. And the British players of the 60s, it was such a small scene, and there were so few places to play, and yet there was a ridiculously high proportion of really great people. And I think it's only now that those people are being discovered. And, you know, there's a book in the works about Tubby Hayes. There's a book about Joe Harriott that's out. There's been a couple of Ronnie Scott biographies. So I think that area is now really being looked at. And where my book is different, it does touch on all that. It brings that in, because actually a lot of books about the 60s in London and Britain, they're very compartmentalized. You know, you'll have books about the Marquee Club and the R&B people, or the pop world, you know, the Beatles or the Stones, whatever. And, you know, you might have the odd book about the jazz world, the odd book about black music in the 60s, whatever. It's all very genreified, and it really wasn't that genreified in the day. I mean, London was an incredible village-like environment, even more so than Belfast, because actually, the funny thing about tonight, getting all these people together, I mean, you might have known most of the people playing tonight, but, you know, Tina had never met Ronnie before, Annie McKenzie had never heard of Pat Gribben before, a few things like that, you know, and yet these are people who all work in Belfast, and yet London in the 60s was like this incredible village where everybody knew everybody. I mean, Paul McCartney could walk down the street and literally bump into Georgie Fame or Ronnie Scott and say, can you get a rhythm, can you get a horn section together for Lady Madonna next week? You know, and that stuff, it literally happened like that.
I actually heard a story that apparently Paul McCartney was in Specsavers, and guess who he bumped into in Specsavers? Everybody.
God. I'm sorry, what was
On that note, we have some other opportunities later on. Whenever we bring Colin back, we'll be opening it to the floors. So if you want to spend the next 15 minutes, as well as listening to what's happening up here, thinking about what you're going to ask, I know Colin's particularly keen to get some interaction with you, so please do that. But once again, a round of applause for a genius in our midst, Colin Harper.